Here are 5 essential tips to getting the most out of Persona 5 Tactica regardless of your experience in strategy RPGs or knowledge of the Persona series. All of this is spoiler free. The first tip is a simple one and often overlooked when people start to rush things, and that is, don't worry about always having to do an action every turn with every character. In this game, if you don't do an action and end your turn, your character will charge, granting powerful bonuses for next turn, while also restoring some HP and SP. The bonus is different per character, so depending on how you play, or if you're fighting a particularly annoying enemy who positions well, a character may possess a charge ability that may solve that problem for you. Speaking of positioning, let's move on to tip number 2. Like other strategy RPGs, it is very important to consider where you're going to be moving your units. In Persona 5 Tactica, you have to focus on cover. There's 2 types of covers in the game, full cover and partial cover. For the cover to be effective, it obviously has to be between the 2 units that are fighting, and it will only impact ranged gun attacks. If an enemy tries to attack you while you are protected by the full cover, you'll take no damage, and if somehow the enemy gets behind your full cover and they shoot at you, you'll still take reduced damage. It's not a stretch to say that full cover is super valuable in this game. Partial cover, on the other hand, reduces damage if it is between 2 units fighting. If the unit behind partial cover is shot at, they will not take reduced damage if the attacking unit has full line of sight on the defensive unit. Enemies can also use cover, so you'll have to play around this mechanic as well. It is important to note that certain skills and abilities can bypass cover, and we'll go over that shortly. The most important thing that you'll have to learn about this cover system is that if you are not behind any cover at all, or your enemy is not behind any cover at all, there is a very high chance that any of your attacks will deal critical damage and knock them down, allowing you to perform probably the most cool thing in this game, which is the triple threat attack. So a triple threat attack is awesome because it essentially allows you to do a resource-free area of effect damage depending on how you position all of your active fielded units. So how it works is that it triangulates between the 3 units on the map, and whatever enemy is standing in that triangle will get hit. Even if you didn't want to do a triple threat attack, by knocking an enemy down, you'll trigger a once more, giving your unit an additional action. As a Persona fan, I want to go out on a limb and say that you're going to need to master this once more mechanic as soon as possible, because in the later parts of the game, the developers are probably going to force you to use this mechanic to effectively and efficiently clear later challenges within the game. One last thing about positioning is that this game is all about manipulating movement of the enemy, so pushing them away or pulling them towards you with various skills, abilities, or even your melee attack. In this game, your basic, resourceless melee attack will push enemies away. You can push them into walls for extra damage and bounce them off the walls. You can push them into other enemies to deal more damage, but be careful because if you push an enemy into an ally, the ally will also take damage. You can even push enemies off ledges, and if you have an ally within range below, you'll do a follow-up combo attack. Pretty cool. Tip number 3, and this one is pretty important, especially if you are a Persona fan, because things are a little bit different. In Persona games, elemental weaknesses are really important, but in this game, elemental weaknesses do not exist. Elemental attacks instead inflicts ailments onto enemies, and the ailment depends on what element you're using. Fire attacks will burn enemies, dealing damage over time at the end of the enemy's turn. Fire attacks can also have a slight pushback effects that you can use. Ice attacks can inflict freeze, which prevents the target from taking any action until they are hit. Similarly, electric attacks will deal shock, which can prevent the unit from taking any actions until they are hit as well. There may be some special interactions with freeze and shock, but I don't know about them yet because I'm not that far into the game. If any of you have already experienced anything like that, let us know in the comments below. Wind can sweep, which causes the target to be blown away from the direction of the attack. Wind attack ignores partial cover, so keep that in mind. Nuke attacks can apply vortex, pulling every other enemy to the target. This is especially useful for clumping up enemies before unleashing a triple threat attack. Psi or psychic attacks causes hypno, causing the target to move towards the skill user. This can be nice for drawing enemies out of cover, or again, clumping them up for a triple threat attack. Bless can inflict dizzy, which makes a unit move randomly the next turn. They can still attack though, so keep that in mind. Curse can cause despair, making the target have reduced mobility while the skill user gets increased mobility. If you're having a good time so far, support your boy, hit that like button, and consider subscribing for more Persona 5 Tactica content. Thanks. Fourth tip, if you like any character specifically but don't like their element and what they do, don't worry, every party member can equip sub-personas, allowing them to cast different elements than what their main persona is. Now, each character will have a skill tree that makes them better at certain elements than others that you can't avoid, but at the very least, each character can always be useful and have utility regardless of the enemy that you're facing. As I mentioned earlier in tip number 2, positioning and enemy displacement is much more important in this game than just the elemental weaknesses, so play with your favorites because it won't matter and you'll enjoy the game a lot more. Final tip, while you can only field 3 active units at a time, know that any reserve unit you're not using can be called upon to come into battle with Baton Pass. The catch is, one of your active unit has to face death before you can Baton Pass them out for a different unit. And you can do this a limited amount of times depending on your difficulty level, so keep that in mind. Coming from a background of playing strategy RPGs with permadeath, having no permadeath in Persona 5 Tactica and this Baton Pass mechanic means I can set up some wacky and fun combos where you could set in a weaker unit to set up everything for your stronger unit, let them die on purpose, and then Baton Pass in your nuke, and then just go wild. Nice. Of course, there may be some restrictions with missions or submissions where it will say you can't die or something like that, but just keep it in mind, Baton Pass is a benefit, it's a mechanic, it's a tool. While you can treat it as additional life, that's just not as fun as treating it as a viable offensive mechanic. And with that said, that's my 5 tips for Persona 5 Tactica. I hope you have a good time playing the game. If there are any additional tips you'd like to share with the community, let us know by leaving a comment below. My name is Varsona, and if you're a fan of strategy RPGs, perhaps you'd be interested in learning about Fire Emblem's not-so-secret ingredient. Video on screen right now.